Hey y'all. In 1896, a maximum security prison was opened in Tennessee to house the most dangerous of inmates. Built by the hands of prisoners themselves, the penitentiary has a dark and bloody history, a prelude to the multiple, sometimes violent spirits that are said to inhabit the buildings today. I'm going to let you know now that you should hang in there until the end of this episode, because the twist ending surprised even me. I'm Candace, and I'll be your guide. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary stands noticeably in the small town of Petros, Tennessee, about 40 miles west of Knoxville. The foreboding sandstone castle-like structure sticks out amongst the stone cliff face surrounding the yard on three sides. Tucked amongst the frozen head wilderness, which gets its name from the snow-capped peaks at high altitude each winter. For this reason, it is said, those who came to Brushy Mountain felt like all hope was lost. The prison earned the nickname the End of the Line, as it housed the state's most dangerous inmates, and successful escape was nearly impossible amongst the rugged terrain. During the prison's use in 1896 through 2009, no one knows exactly how many people died in the facility. But the best estimate is approximately 10,000 people have met their end at Brushy Mountain. Now, let me tell you that Brushy Mountain never performed executions, and maybe you'll understand why so much residual activity may remain there. Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary was built in 1896 by the hands of inmates at the end of the Coal Creek War. Before the prison existed where it does today, the surrounding mountains were used for coal mining. However, poor working conditions led to strikes, and prisoners were brought in to work in the mines. The contention and ongoing conflict led to bloodshed on each side, triggering the Coal Creek War. Eventually, in the conflict, the existing prison was burned to the ground, and the inmates were used to build the wooden structure that was the original Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. Inmates were utilized to work the mines, saving the state of Tennessee in labor costs, and compromising the health and well-being of the prisoners until the mining practice was dismantled in the 1960s. If the inmates were found to have poor production in the mines, they were chained to the whipping post in the courtyard outside the prison, and whipped until their prison jumpsuits were embedded into their flesh. Overcrowding, poor sanitation, black lung, and the onset of tuberculosis, typhoid fever, pneumonia, and syphilis within the walls caused the death of many inmates during this time frame. In 1931, the prison housed 976 men, about 300 over its capacity. To correct this issue, the authorities had inmates cut sandstone from the nearby quarry, and the plans were put into place for a new stone structure to replace the original wooden building. Constructed in the shape of a cross, the new facility is 4 stories tall, topped by battlements and surrounded by an 18-foot stone wall. Initially, the improvement in overcrowding and sanitation improved morale and health of the inmates. However, by the middle of the century, the prison was reclassified as maximum security, accepting the inmates who performed unspeakable crimes. Needless to say, the prison experience was about to turn especially dark for Brushy Mountain. One of the most foreboding experiences at Brushy is the solitary confinement area known as the Hole. According to the plaque posted, quote, "The Hole housed disobedient and dangerous inmates for days, weeks, even months at a time, if the warden deemed it right." The Hole wasn't just about solitary confinement to a 6 by 3 by 8 foot space. It was far worse. Inhabitants were once treated to quote-unquote suspension torture, tied by their thumbs to pulley cords hanging from the ceiling, toes barely touching the floor, for up to 30 minutes. This went on until 1905, when the practice was deemed inhumane by a state Senate commission panel. While the size of the hole increased to 4 by 8 by 10 feet when the new prison opened in 1933, it was still a dreadfully dark dungeon containing just a mattress and 2 buckets, one for fresh water, the other for a toilet. Oftentimes, the hole was kept in absolute darkness, and being somewhat underground, there was little ambient light. The prisoners would often lose their sight temporarily while they were kept down there, and rarely permanently. While trapped in the tiny cells of the hole, they would often leave tally marks on the walls to indicate how long they'd been down there, and were often subjected to long stretches of solitude. As I previously mentioned, with the bucket for the fresh water and the other for a toilet, inmates would try to find a way to mark the buckets so they wouldn't be mistaken for one another. In 1957, the hole was finally shut down, and instead, D Block was built. D Block is a small, freestanding building with a handful of one-person cells and a fenced, secured exercise area on a small patio outside. D Block was reserved for the most heinous of criminals, the scariest of the scary. Coincidentally, D Block was built on the site of the old death house, where inmates' corpses were stored until they could be claimed by their families or buried in the nearby cemetery. It was, in essence, Brushy's morgue. Rumor has it that there was also a crematorium on site. As you've gathered, Brushy Mountain was known to be a very dark place where hope, along with much of the inmate population, died. With a gathering of the worst offenders in Tennessee, it's unsurprising there was so much jailhouse violence. In the cafeteria, there were often stabbings from butcher knives or attacks with meat cleavers, as this was the only area of the prison that the items could be easily obtained. A former inmate, George Wyatt, is now a tour guide at Brushy. He recounts one night when another inmate was stabbed to death, then skinned, gutted, and flushed down the prison toilet piece by piece to hide the evidence. This went on all night long. By morning, all that remained of the victim was a bag of bones. Quote, "There was some bad boys in here," unquote, George states. He also tells of a prisoner who spent 29 days locked in the abyss that was the hole, who smashed his head hard enough into the wall to end it. These stories are smattered amongst the tales of people being beaten to death in bathrooms, deliberately crushed on weight benches in the gym, and a man being burned alive by a Molotov cocktail thrown through the bars of his cell. Aside from the violence, the living conditions were still atrocious. George explains that his prison blanket was completely black from cockroach feces, and in the winter it once got so cold that his blanket was frozen to his cell wall. In 1972, the violence had reached such a state that the prison guards went on strike, demanding security improvements. The strike was enough to shut down the prison for 4 years. Improvements were made, but upon reopening in 1976, it was clear that it was still the same Brushy Mountain that it had always been. Barney Conley, a black prisoner, had requested transfer to another facility out of fear of his life. He wrote a letter to his attorney on January 7th, stating, quote, "We are being put in a position where we must attack others in order to ensure our safety," unquote. Racial tensions were running high between black inmates, which made up 55% of the inmate population, the white inmates, and the exclusively white prison guard staff. In 1982, these tensions erupted, and 7 white inmates armed with a .25 caliber pistol, a switchblade, and 6 shanks sawed out of their cells and took 4 guards hostage, stealing their keys. These inmates rushed to the 3rd tier where the prison segregated their black inmates and fired upon 4 of them in their cells. They killed 2 of the black men and injured 2 who managed to hide behind their mattresses, trapped in their cells. The 7 uprisers did eventually surrender to the prison medic, who was the only person who tried to stop the shooting. It was later determined that the gun had been smuggled in, but rumors were swirling about collusion between the exclusively white prison staff and the inmates. One guard, R.L. Potter, was forced to resign after failing a polygraph regarding his involvement. In March 1970, Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary's most famous inmate, James Earl Ray, had arrived. If you're unfamiliar, James Earl Ray was convicted of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was a reportedly well-liked but unadaptable inmate, attempting escape twice within his first 2 years at the facility. Finally, in 1977, he and 6 other inmates built a 16-foot-tall ladder made from salvaged pipe and scaled the wall of the yard. The FBI and U.S. Marshal Service swarmed into Morgan County, but it only took less than 3 days to locate the escaped prisoners. The aforementioned rugged terrain of the Frozen Head Wilderness meant that in less than 3 days, the group had only made it 8.5 miles away. The escaped inmates were found by the tracking hounds, cowering in the forest covered with leaves. A few years later, in 1981, 3 inmates attacked James Earl Ray and stabbed him 22 times in the former prison law library, which is now the museum. Some say that it was payback for the assassination of MLK, but others believed it was orchestrated by Ray himself for publicity and in hopes of receiving a new trial, as he claimed that his confession was coerced. Amazingly, he survived the attack and was transferred from Brushy to the state facility in 1992, where he died a few years later. As of 2008, Brushy Mountain was the oldest operating prison in Tennessee and remained so until it was closed June 11, 2009. All remaining prisoners and operations were transferred to the Morgan County Correctional Complex. The facility was reopened in 2018 under new ownership, which incorporated a distillery, museum, gift shop, and restaurant. They also offer tours and paranormal investigations. In late October, I did an overnight paranormal investigation at Brushy, so I could tell you all about it. But let's begin by talking about the existing paranormal encounters at Brushy Mountain. People report experiencing clanging bars, disembodied voices and whispers, someone breathing on their neck, and unexplained footsteps. Some report seeing a female apparition in some form in the courtyard near the whipping post. People often report seeing shadowy figures, and sometimes apparitions that look like people. Sometimes entities have been seen that don't appear to be entirely human, such as a creature that appears to creep along the floors, and another that has been described as part man, part goat, with cloven hooves. Supposed demons have also been encountered at Brushy Mountain. The most frightening reports are those of being physically attacked while at Brushy. Some people have reported being touched, pushed, scratched, or even choked while visiting. Others have sometimes gotten physically ill while attending. Nausea is commonly reported. Generally, most of the paranormal experiences reported are focused in the hole, the cafeteria, the auditorium, which is the former hospital ward for Brushy Mountain, and the third floor where the racial uprising attacks took place. But the gymnasium, laundry room, and D block are often said to also be hotspots for paranormal activity. One of the more interesting paranormal experiences I found in my research was the person who provoked the spirit of James Earl Ray. They went to his former cell in the prison and played a recording of MLK's "I Have a Dream" speech. Then, they caught an EVP of a voice stating, "Hush." If you're unfamiliar with EVP, it stands for Electronic Voice Phenomenon, and is the experience of using a recording device to detect voices that were not audibly present in the moment. I wish I could say that we had some of these incredible experiences while at Brushy Mountain, but honestly, there wasn't much. We dropped in for a while during the day to get the lay of the land, then returned that night for an investigation from 8 p.m. and stayed until around 2:30 a.m. During that time, my partner in crime for this investigation, Scott, saw a shadow pass in front of a window in D block. We don't believe anyone was outside to have done this, but can't be certain. In the cafeteria, there were a couple of flashlights. One commonly used trick is to unscrew the end of the flashlight, making it so the slightest touch makes it light up. We also had a couple of light-up cat toys, balls that would flash when they were touched. So we have 2 or more flashlights and 2 of the cat balls scattered in the room. One flashlight did illuminate and flash at times, as well as one of the cat balls. Sometimes this did seem to occur in timing with the group asking questions of whatever entity we may be interacting with. However, if we were talking to anything intelligent, it was unable to illuminate the other flashlight or the other cat ball. While in the main room outside of the hole, we came across a small group using a Flux 2 device and a spirit box-like device with headphones. They also had one of the aforementioned cat balls. The Flux 2 is a device that is meant for yes or no questions, with a green and red light for responses. According to the Flux 2 website, it senses minor change in environment, like motion, temperature, and distance. It did respond with lights and sounds when I approached it to place an EMF reader next to it. In theory, the electromagnetic field in an area will change when a spirit is nearby. EMF readers also detect electricity and electrical components, and honestly, this one wasn't very sensitive. The most response I could get from it was placing it near my phone to get it to light up even a little bit. With the EMF detector next to the Flux 2 and the cat ball, the group asked questions of a spirit they were calling Calvin. The EMF detector didn't activate at all during this time. The woman wearing the headphones for the spirit box device was stating aloud things that the supposed entity was saying. That, call me cynical if you like, one person wearing headphones and reporting results to a group is far from objective. It's worth mentioning that at one point outside of D block, another investigator unexpectedly vomited. There were a few complaints of nausea amongst others at various points in the night. The entire experience at Brushy Mountain was tainted by the fact that they allow so many people in for the paranormal investigations at a time. It is a big place, but there were roughly 80 people there, and it was constant sensory pollution. Throw in multiple spirit boxes loudly and constantly chattering, and it was nearly impossible to do any EVP work wherever we went, which is what I wanted to focus on. Overall, the investigation was a positive experience, allowing me to discover and really get to know this place with such an incredible and dark history. I'm happy to have gotten the opportunity, and I'm sure that a less skeptical person would have gotten far more from the experience than we did. There was no shortage of I sense, I feel like, I think stories and experiences. I was just looking for something a little different. I wanted more objectivity. I hope to go back to Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in the future with a private group to get the experience that I had hoped for. Okay, y'all. This is where I interrupt myself and depart from my own script. I had this episode written out entirely, talking about my lackluster experience at Brushy and how I wish that we could have experienced something while we were there. Anything. Something solid, not easily debunked, that really convinced us that there were spirits at Brushy Mountain. Well, I got it. It was just a week after our visit. In preparation for this episode, I listened to all of the audio recordings I took on my digital voice recorder. Hopeful for an EVP, but expecting nothing since the trip honestly left me feeling disenchanted. Y'all, I could not have been prepared for what I was about to hear. Is this where she said not to go?
Is it good places in here? Is it going
We'll just lock our asses in here. In the recording, we are walking from one area of the auditorium, the prison's former hospital ward and a known hotspot, into a small room in the back near some cells. You'll hear me ask, is this where she said not to go? And Scott reply, no, she said don't go in the cell block. And I replied, oh, in return. Then, as Scott resumes talking, a voice whispers directly into the microphone. Yes. Yes. Twice. Y'all, that voice was not present in the room with us at that time. To make this far scarier, I am fairly certain that it is my voice. And no, I definitely did not say those words. But I believe an entity used my voice in that moment, and that chills me to the bone. I've asked those closest to me, and opinions are mixed on whether they believe the voice to be mine or not, so you can give me your feedback on that one. I've heard of EVPs happening where a spirit uses someone's voice, but it's the first time it has happened to me. I can't debunk this recording. I ran experiments with my recorder after the fact, holding it at varying distances from my mouth, replicating a breeze, blowing into it, brushing it against various fabrics that I wore that night, etc. I cannot replicate a sound similar to that terrifying yes. Also, if you listen closely, the volume of the whisper is much louder than the surrounding audio. Something was whispering directly into the recorder that I was holding in my hand, which I'd been holding near my waist with my elbow bent. You can hear how far away it picks up our voices in the recording, but that whisper, it's right there. Also, you can hear how my next sentence after the whisper follows immediately in response to what Scott says. No delay to move away from the mic had this been me, and no time to take a breath. With all of that information to keep in mind, let me play it for you again. Is this where she said not to go?
Is it good places in here? Is it going
We'll just lock our asses in here. Well, y'all, now that you've heard the history and experiences at Brushy Mountain, let's talk about it. Man, Brushy Mountain is a fascinating place. The history is so dark and so interesting. Seeing the yard behind the prison shows me just how inescapable it is. I'll make sure to include some pictures of that. But it really is just completely steep cliff facing or rugged mountains immediately behind the yard. Also in my research, I uncovered the story of Geronimo. He was a deer that was the inmate's pet. When he was young, he fell off the cliff facing into the yard, so that's how he got his name. But they kept him and fed him and loved him, and he stayed there for a long time until they had to send him to Nashville with some prisoners, and he didn't thrive there the way he did at Brushy. But I thought that was a precious story. So aside from James Earl Ray, there were other less famous but still kind of notorious inmates, like the fast food killer who killed 7 people while robbing a Captain D's, McDonald's, and Baskin-Robbins in Tennessee. Also, Byron Low Tax Looper, who, legally changed his middle name to Low Tax because he was a politician. But he quickly was under investigation for corruption after getting his post. And when he got the chance to run against a popular incumbent for the Senate, he decided that his plan was to shoot his opponent in the head. So he ended up at Brushy. Speaking of James Earl Ray, he was stabbed 22 times. How could anyone think that that's publicity? Once is publicity. 22 is attempted murder, and I don't even know how he survived that. That's a crazy theory to me. He ended up dying of hepatitis C, and I was really trying to find out if that was a result of the blood transfusion that he received once he was transferred to Nashville. I saw some speculation about that, but nothing confirming whether he already had it or got it as a result of the transfusions. Because that was the days before the blood testing of donated blood was so common, so this unfortunately happened sometimes. Initially, when I heard about Brushy, I discounted the idea of how many people died there, because how could 10,000 people die in a prison if they weren't being executed? But then when you think about the number of infections, pneumonia, typhoid, TB, syphilis, etc., plus working all day, every day in the mine, and if you don't work hard enough in the mine, you get lashed with thick leather straps and you don't get any time to rest. Well, of course people died. Conditions at Brushy were so bad that they were commonly compared to the Siberian prisons of the Soviet Union. To add just a little bit of clarity to the racial turmoil, there was only one black family in the county at that time. The roads around Brushy are winding and mountainous, and it made it tricky to commute to the area. So the 100% white staff may not have been so much by design. It could have just been the demographic of the area that was surrounding the prison. But of course, that's entirely possible. Brushy was such a rough place that they didn't even have a prison industry, which was very common at the time, because the authorities thought that machinery in the prison would, quote unquote, more readily arm the dangerous inmates. All right, let's get to the paranormal stuff. I have to start with the elephant in the room, y'all. That EVP has me thoroughly freaked out. I swear that's my voice, and that makes it so much scarier. I know I didn't say those words. I absolutely did not put the recorder up next to my mouth and say, yes, yes, at random in the middle of speaking with people. Had it not been my voice, it would have been cool and creepy, but the fact that it's my voice makes it terrifying, honestly. To make it even better, I wasn't even recording on purpose. I thought that my recorder was off as we were transitioning between the rooms there. In order to record, you have to slide up a button on my recorder. And I assumed it was just an accident until I got that terrifying EVP, and now it makes me wonder if maybe I didn't accidentally turn it on. Maybe somehow else it got turned on. I really wanted to do a lot more EVP work at Brushy, but again, there were so many people. It was so peoply, and that made it so loud. In almost all of my recordings, all you hear are people talking that were present in the moment and in the surrounding areas. The only way that I got that quiet area for the EVP that I did get was because we had separated into very small groups and spread throughout the old hospital ward. But until I heard that EVP, I was feeling disappointed with my experience there. I wanted objective evidence, not something easily or immediately debunked. I really wanted to give credence to the cat balls and the flashlights in the cafeteria, but it's tricky. Or in the hole when, quote unquote, better technology, the EMF detector didn't respond. But of course, it's absolutely maddening because we don't even know if EMF does pick up spirits. All of this is our best guess, everything. Any sort of paranormal, quote unquote, science is our best speculation at the time. So the EMF detector not picking up, does that mean anything at all? I don't even know. I think this trip made me hate spirit boxes. If you don't know what a spirit box is, it's a little radio wave device, and in theory, spirits can manipulate the radio waves to make it say words. But these things chatter constantly. They're noisy, they're really hard to understand, in this stiff robotic voice that isn't very conversational. And honestly, it bothers me when people try to interpret what they said and you're thinking, all right, that box did not just say that. Why are you telling a group of people that that box said that? Again, it's human influence, and too much human influence ruins any objectivity. At Waverly Hills back in the day, I used an Ovulus device, which is the same concept, but it doesn't chatter endlessly. And at the time, I was really impressed with how it seemed to respond frighteningly appropriately. But, Waverly Hills is an episode for another time. There were a lot of subjective experiences at Brushy, which I'm sorry to dismiss in this episode, because that is absolutely what you look for with your own encounters. In all of my experiences, they've been heavily subjective because when you feel something, when you know something yourself that you can't prove to other people, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. But when you're in a group this big, it doesn't mean as much if you tell me that you feel a presence to your left. But again, when you're alone, at home, and you feel a presence to your left, that matters. I guess it's just the dichotomy of paranormal, or maybe just me being cynical. I don't know. I just wanted more objectivity from the visit. But overall, the experience was incredible. This EVP thoroughly freaks me out, and I really want to get back to Brushy Mountain. As always, I want to know what you think. Do you guys think that's my voice in the EVP? Is Brushy the kind of place that you want to go? I do want to return with a private group, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. As our investigation came to a close and we thought we didn't have any paranormal encounters, late into the night things got pretty silly. I swear they started out serious, but they didn't end up that way. I've included some outtakes after the ending music for this episode. A little comic relief, I guess. You can find plenty of Brushy Mountain photos from our trip on the pod's Instagram and Facebook at obscureappalachia. Please feel free to email me your own paranormal stories to obscureappalachia@gmail.com. You know the drill. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast provider so more people can find me. Thank you so much to everyone who's already left a review. You guys are the best. On that note, if you want to share the podcast with friends and family, that's awesome too. Thanks, y'all. Until next time.
Y'all signed a waiver, I didn't.
Are there actually any ghosts here, or are you just pretending?
Tired of all these people coming in here and asking you stupid ass questions? I know you don't know what this is, but it's a phone. You can talk into it. Shut up, they don't know what this is. They don't know iPhones. Say hello. Were the nurses hot?
Jesus.